challenge the narratives that have defined us from what I would call the outside. And it allows us to insist that we are something more layered, more intimate, more true, more nuanced. New work means new possibilities for how we see ourselves, for how others understand us, and for what the future generations will inherit. And so, like all of our panels, we have the privilege of hearing directly from the authors behind these works about their process, their intentions, and the journeys that brought these books into being. So I invite you to listen closely, to stay curious, and to think about what it means to support these stories, because that is how a literary community grows. In this panel, we are going to highlight okay, here we go. We've got our panelists. Cindy Anh Nguyen, she's a UCLA Assistant Professor and author of Bibliotactics, Libraries, and the Colonial Public in Vietnam. Hugh Nguyen, Orange County Clerk-Recorder and author of My Unforgettable Journey, A Long Way from Home. Jade Hilde, Vietnamese-Irish-Norwegian writer of Hair, a Lai Mỹ Memoir, which I also want to take a moment to say I'm so proud of her because we are both professors at Miracosta College and we are full-time teaching, and she was, she's a mom and a wife and an incredible leader on our campus, and then she writes a book and I'm like, you've got to come to Viet Book Fest, and she is here, so thank you so much, Jade, for being here. And then Phillip Nguyen, Executive Director of Vietnamese American Roundtable, presenting Đình Anthology Cookbook, a collection of recipes and family stories celebrating over 50 years of Vietnamese American resilience and community. Those are our authors, and I also want to introduce the moderator of this fabulous panel. He is the awesome and kick-ass Kenneth Nguyen of the Vietnamese podcast. Yeah, Kenneth is, that's your daddy, that's right, literally their dad. So it's great that these guys are kids in the audience. Ken is not only a good friend, like a bro, our translators were earlier saying bro has a lot of meaning, and he is like a brother, but he's just super cool, so that's why he's my bro. He's the dynamic creator and charismatic host of The Vietnamese, a podcast highlighting Vietnamese voices worldwide. Since 2020, he's produced nearly 500 episodes, 7 this week already, featuring conversations on identity, diaspora, and culture. He's featured notable authors, actors, academics, scientists, entrepreneurs, influencers, philanthropists, chefs, and many other professionals in a range of fields. The podcast has surpassed 1 million downloads across major platforms. Congratulations, Ken. His podcast has become a trusted space for storytelling, dialogue, and cultural connection. His podcast has even been assigned by teachers and professors for students to listen to as a way to capture Vietnamese American stories and histories. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kenneth Nguyen and our panelists to the stage.
Thank you so much for the kind words, Dr. Kalha. Thank you. I will sit down right now. Usually my podcast episodes are about an hour to an hour and a half, so this is like speed dating. So I'm only gonna have like a limited amount of time for each of you, but I would love to hear, first of all, how your book came to life. So we'll just go through, why don't we start with Jade?
Oh gosh, thanks.
No pressure, no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. They didn't give a mic to me because they knew about me. happening today. So the genesis of my work really started during COVID with two then very tiny babies at home. And I was teaching classes online from Miracosta, as Tao mentioned earlier. And I felt like a real hypocrite teaching poetry when all my life I'd been like, poetry, past Shel Silverstein, I don't care. So I was like, maybe I gotta learn some more before I teach this stuff. So I started reading more poetry, our homeboy Ocean Boom, gotta start with him. But, lots of other poets like Ada Limon, Amy Nezukumatatio, and I found myself getting really inspired, and it kind of cracked open all of these memories from childhood that I hadn't thought about, that probably the repressed trauma from growing up. And so the poems kind of became these little living pieces that when DVAN put out their call for memoirs, I was like, wow, I realized that there is a common thread among these poems that's really a thread of silence, something that I haven't talked about, especially in relation to mental health, which is often so stigmatized in our community and definitely in my family. And becoming a mother, I really had to prioritize that mental health. And so in the 3 months from when DVAN said, hey, we're looking for memoirs, and that deadline, I stayed up every night from 10 to 2, just like religiously writing and trying to get it all out. And so that word vomit is what you have in front of you today at the Libromobile. So yeah,
Thank you so much.
It felt necessary.
Thanks so much. One question. So what you see here looks like an academic book, a work of history covering the 20th century, questions of libraries and the public, questions of Vietnamese identity and history and language. And that had its origins in me wanting to pursue and understand a wider and dynamic history that was beyond the war. Right, growing up in a refugee camp, or being raised and being born in a refugee camp and being raised in Vietnamese America, I always knew the power of what it meant to study and learn history, both through oral history from my family, from my community, but then also as I pursued it academically, and that kind of like launched my journey as a historian. Yet the whole journey and what looks like an academic book with a capital H, history, was such a journey because I also realized, the power that came with learning truth and truth making is a social, collective, and personal one as well. So, as I was teaching and learning history and doing I started doing field work in Vietnam in 2016. But before that, I was learning Vietnamese as an adult too, and French as well. So that was like an extensive process. And it took many iterations. But like towards the end, like for me, it's like the thing about writing a book, especially an academic one, is like knowing when the end is, right? Because you just keep doing the research and it never ends. But I knew this book had to end, in part because I was writing another book. I was writing the anti-book that couldn't fit in a historic book. All the things that I was like personally questioning about, like, why historically Vietnamese has become the national language, and like how French got displaced, the role of that in thinking about literary history, all of the people that I wanted to uncover in writing a historical book, specifically the readers of the library, not just these like cold institutions from that then became the National Library in Vietnam, and thinking specifically about like the human practices of what it means to read, right? It's one that moves beyond an institution, it moves across generations. So I'm like, at that point, it fit in the book, but I was like, I gotta end this book and then, release it into the world. And we'll talk about it more a little bit. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. For me, as an immigration growing up in Vietnam, I wanted to share my story, my journey, that connects with a lot of refugees in our country. Being born with an American soldier dad, a South Vietnamese mom. Growing up in Vietnam was difficult. I looked different, it was hard. It was a struggle. My grandparents raised me, my mom was young. And so for me, it's just a struggle like a lot of refugees gone through and what we have accomplished in 50 years. 50 years sounds like a long time, but we have done a lot, our Vietnamese community. as you can see in Westminster, Garden Grove, San Jose, places we've been to. And for me, you know, the journey just to come to America, what I went through, barely surviving Operation Baby Lift because my grandparents gave me up for adoption because they were afraid the communists were gonna hurt the immigrations, right? But thank God they picked me up that day because that plane, as you know in history, crashed in a rice field. So I wouldn't be here with you, but God had a plan for me. And for us to struggle to even go to Tan Son Nhat Airport on the 29th and 30th, and they bombed the runway. Now we're stuck at the airport, right? And so we rescued by helicopter, which we know now is Operation Frequent Wind, rescue by the Midway. Anybody been on the US Midway in San Diego? Again, without that ship, I wouldn't be here. And so it ain't growing up in America. We all went through it, racist stuff my grandparents went through, a lot of our grandparents. And going to school was difficult, right? When we first came in '75. And for me, to work hard, struggle like everybody, just to live the American dream. And then I was blessed to be elected the first Vietnamese American County Clerk-Recorder in the country. And so from coming over with nothing and becoming an elected, it's been a dream come true. And to have a great family that I do have. And then I didn't know my dad for 50 years. And if you want to, do not submit your DNA to Ancestry.com if you have secrets out there. I want to tell you guys that right now. Because I always tell my dad, you got caught. But to find him after 50 years through Ancestry, just doing DNA was amazing. And for all the immigrations, including my sister, a lot of people are not aware, over 25,000 immigration were born during that Vietnam War. And only 5% have found their parents. And it wasn't easy. People think Ancestry is easy. I had this guy that was really mean to me. He first thing he said was, "What do you want from us?" And I'm like, "I don't want anything. I don't want money. I don't want anything." But it's the perception, right? I mean, it's not fun when my dad had to apologize to his wife and his kids that, hey, look, there's your brother right there. So yeah, it's more for me, was more inspiration to share with everyone. And the kids, we speak at the students and stuff, that if I can do it, you can do it too. And we live in a great country. And that's why I did it.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Kenneth. Let me just put the book up. So y'all can see, you can get it, a copy from the bookstore, shout out. Pre-sales are out right now, but it's an honor to be up here with y'all. This book is an homage to all the people that I'm bringing with me here. We came from the Bay Area this past weekend. There's 50 stories that we collected over almost 10 years, 8-9 years, since its inception, that we were able to highlight. In 2017, I think where the story of this book kind of starts is with T. Bui's The Best We Could Do. The Vietnamese American Roundtable in San Jose, we have a youth program called SEEDS, which stands for Student Education and Engagement for Development and Success. So SEEDS, we're trying to plant seeds. There's civic, social, political, youth development. And we asked them to read The Best We Could Do. And part of The Best We Could Do is that T highlights the importance of knowing your origin story across the ocean, right? And so we asked the students, as part of this 8-week summer program that they're a part of, to think of something, to think about their community, to think about their origin story, and to really reflect on what is it about where they come from that they feel most meaningful to them. And we asked them to do this project. So for the first iteration of our summer program, they came up with this idea of gomyerin, which y'all know. You can find a lunch special. Everyone has some rice. We pass it around. There's a protein, but it's a family style meal. It's something that requires us to invite everyone in to eat with us. And they wanted to highlight a family meal and eating family style as part of their origin story, because they, as youth 10 years ago, didn't have a lot of opportunities I don't know if we still have opportunities now, but they didn't have opportunities to really talk with their parents and really bridge these generational gaps and talk about the war and sacrifice and all these sort of silences that existed in their lives. And so they came up with this idea to collect those stories, to collect the histories, and to collect these artifacts from their families. Fast forward to 8 years later, those same students are back with us as volunteers, as interns, as our staff members, and they really, for the 50th anniversary, as we all know, we wanted to collect 50 stories from our community members, where they came from, what were the trials and tribulations, again, what were the silences and sacrifices, and then put that into something that they could really like tangibly see and feel, and that we could use for not just our youth program, but for the broader community to see that, like, you know, maybe it's a little bit easier to talk about where you come from and who you are if it's over a nice warm meal eaten family style. So that's sort of where Gamyeon comes from.
That's beautiful. I'm gonna riff off this idea of Gamyeon. I'm gonna take this idea. I had a podcast episode with Hwang. He's an LA Commission for Civil Rights in LA, and he said, if we don't have a seat at the table, we are the menu item. Everybody here has a seat at this table, so we are not menu items. We are creators, people who are doing the work. My question to each one of you is, how does your work inform your writing or your project to put this together, and vice versa? How does the writing inform the work that you do? Let's start with Jade.
Man, I got the hot seat over here. How does my work inform my writing? Well, I think as an educator, especially I'm a teacher of literature and composition, creative writing. So we're constantly encountering these dominant narratives, these types and tropes, especially of Vietnamese Americans, which there's a large erasure and absence, I think, in mainstream American education about truth and reality and the complexities that comprise our community. So oftentimes students come into a classroom, especially of like Asian American literature, and their limited knowledge hinges on Full Metal Jacket or something grotesque like that. Very reductive, very one-dimensional. And so as a mixed race person, kind of going back to what Hugh was saying of, you know, being My Lai, a lot of these stereotypes kind of get compounded in the comments that people feel entitled to say to you. Because you don't fit into that perfect one-dimensional box for them to check off their list, okay, Vietnamese got it, okay, American got it, but when you start blending those things and you don't quite add up to what they're used to, you're kind of forced to reckon with these competing histories and narratives. So I think in teaching students to analyze a dominant narrative, to break it apart, to analyze how and why it's put together, what purpose it serves, it really opens up the opportunity for people to tell stories about what makes people uncomfortable. And those are the realities of our lives. So in this particular book, I'm writing a lot about mental health struggles, which is very difficult to talk about in terms of intergenerational trauma, suicidal ideations, depression, anxiety, all these things that I grew up not having words for. That was just expected, it was part of the family tradition, this is your inheritance. And then realizing in motherhood that there was this other opportunity to create a new story, not just for my students, but for my children, and how Vietnamese culture, tradition, and history would become new in their lives and not feel so heavy or burdensome or a punishment or something that I was always excluded from but also obligated to, this kind of catch-22 bind, but something that is, as it should be, a true gift to them. And so, outside in the courtyard watching them dance and, listen to the bilingual stories, you can see kind of this generational shift. So it's kind of a twofold answer to your question, that my work is as a teacher and as a mother, so really opening up new possibilities for storytelling. And I think that's part of why the book comes out in different forms. There's some prose, there's some poetry, there's letters to movie stars, because I'm a creepy stalker too. All these things that make us who we are, I wanted to include it all in there. Like, yeah, I'm Vietnamese American. I can speak the language. I eat the food. But I also love hip hop. And oh my God, TGIF shows, like that's all part of me. So I think the best lesson that I try to teach my students and my kids is that everything that you are contributes to the culture. It doesn't detract from it. It doesn't make you less than or inauthentic, but you are broadening the beauty of what it means to be Vietnamese American.
Thank you so much, Jade, for sharing that. I'm just gonna riff off like what your important work on dominant narratives. So the dominant narrative that I've been grappling with as someone who first started to work on the history of Vietnamese literature is this dominance of like, well, high literature is a European American classical one, Vietnamese, and then or a Chinese Sinitic traditional past one. So the forms of capital L literature was something that I was grappling with as someone living in the Vietnamese American community. And firstly, coming from at least 3 generations of those without formal lettered training, right? That I proudly come from my grandparents and my great-grandparents who read in a very different way. They read through recitations of their prayers and kind of oral forms of knowledge and communication. They shared and passed down those types of stories in really different ways. And my mom also, like growing up and thinking about literacy in the United States, like I was her translator or interpreter in both English and Vietnamese. So for me, pushing against like capital L literature as like books have truth and like if you know the classical canon, then you could like kind of like stun and show off your literariness. But I didn't grow up with that literary culture in that family. My family was working and worried about kind of other types of survival things from like where I grew up in a restaurant family, for example. So I was like first in my family to go to finish junior high and then into college and then to be a professor. So it was like kind of ironic because like my mom was like, why are you writing a book about books? Like clearly we don't like really think about books. And I was like, well, actually I realized that I'm writing a book about everything around the book, which is about libraries, about social life. I asked my father, I was like, did you ever go to the Zalong Library in the 80s in Saigon? And then he's like, yeah, we went there to buôn bán. We went there to like sell because that's where all the rich people were. And then I was like, oh, so that really informed how I approached it, was like this social life around library spaces and highlighting these voices who were engaging in what it means to go to a library space in the 1930s and pursue self-directed knowledge and have a sense of agency within the French colonial context. So you have like all these layers of power and like inequality, yet people were figuring it out. They were teaching themselves French, working in vernacular Vietnamese, Cookbook, bringing from their kind of either Confucian history and their context, and engaging in a multilingual, multiliteral, and multimodal space of what it means to read. And that is like very relational to how like my family grew up reading too, where it's like, well, we're kind of like translating, mistranslating, misunderstanding one another all the time. And that's how reading is. Like it's socially situated, it's relational, it has a story, like even how the type of relationship that you might have with a book. So my kind of like dominant narrative was like this kind of like meta kind of resistance of like high literature and thinking that like we can all be readers. Like we can all, there's like not one way of reading, and we can read socially, we can read defiantly, we can even like not read. Like we're not supposed to say that at Viet Book Fest, but I think it's like pushing against kind of like that there's only one way to read, and if you don't read, you're like kind of failing in some way. But like you gotta like, at this point, also the other backstories, I work in information studies now too, so I think a lot about like different forms of media, right? Like my mom is like listening to audiobooks and retelling stories, and those are other kind of creative forms of rearticulations of like Tale of Gyu or like, all these like big Vietnamese classics, but like she's engaging with literature and culture in such dynamic ways that also like extend beyond the book.
For everybody interested, I'm going to host a 2-hour podcast in the parking lot after this. This is a lot. Thank you though. Hugh?
Philip, I don't know how we follow these two.
I'm not sure. Just word.
Wow. For me, I mean, being elected county clerk recorder, I'm in charge of everybody's record. Most important record in your life. From when you were born, birth, to getting married, and death certificate. Business owners have to file a fictitious business name. You buy a house, you have to record it with our office. And I have histories, archives for all of County of Orange. So for me, it all started, a famous writer from the Register asked me, he said, you're in charge of everybody's important record, and you don't even know who your dad is. That's how it started for me. And so it motivated me to search for my dad first, and then just to share stories about histories, right? Like you guys are talking about different culture and different food. I mean, I love eating Vietnamese food, no doubt. That's my favorite food, so you're making me hungry looking at that book. But it's about the history for all of us. It's not just one of us up here. It's connected, right? My grandparents are no longer here, but they are the one that struggled. They are the one that got us here, right? All our grandparents and parents. And that's what I want to relate, is not to forget about the history, about what we all went through. I mean, come on, we came over in '75 with nothing, all of us. I mean, and now you see, you know, teachers and doctors and business owners in our community. Is huge. And so for me, it's just more of a motivation. And I'm blessed to do a job that I love. I'm in charge of everybody's history. So if you need a birth certificate, anybody want to get married? That's my favorite question. Everybody stays really quiet. But you got to come to my office. So yeah, so for me, it's about connecting the history with our kids now, motivating them, and not forget about the history that we went through.
It was, how do you, I'm thinking about like, when we talk to our youth and we ask them to go back, go home, or call your parents. I do this in my Asian American Studies classes too at San Francisco State. I'm like, just call your parents after today's lecture. That's sort of how I got involved in doing this work in the first place, is that when I took my first Asian American Studies class, and then I was learning about the Vietnam War and like this aftermath of the war and refugee stories. I called my parents and was like, hey, did y'all go through this? You know? And they're like, well, why are you asking me about that? You know? And I would show up like at the yo or at the birthday or at the wedding, and I'd be sitting there with my uncles who are yowing, and then and I'd be like, yo, like, y'all, do y'all know about this thing that happened on this like very particular date? And they'd be like, of course, but why are you talking about that right now? You know? But then it would be always followed up with like a lecture, or like words of advice, or like this whole conversation that we'd have about aspects or parts of them that my generation, like the cousins, right, would have never known really existed. And I think like, I think Cindy, to your point, like when I asked my parents to collect a recipe for this book, and some of the stories that we heard as we were putting this book together, it's like, why would you ask us about food? Like that's such a mundane, like normal thing, right? Like we eat food every day. We eat food to survive. Like there's nothing more. Like there's nothing more. There's nothing less. We eat food to live, right? And so I think providing that extra layer for this particular book to try and capture their stories, and to know, like from an Asian American Studies lens, as Jade, I think you pointed out earlier, around like narrative representation and just narrative power in general, and the agency that we have as a younger generation to collect the stories, and the agency that perhaps was taken away or given up by our parents and grandparents and these elder generations who are now like passing on in the 50th anniversary, right? That we're trying to reinstate for them, right? Or really amplify for them. I think that's captured in this book, and sort of the work to talk to our parents in our broken Vietglish, to capture their story, to record it, to then write it out, and then encourage people like out in the community and our students to be able to do that. I think that's sort of like the beating heart of this book. It's both like knowing that food is important, and then also making sense of like, yo, like food is actually like a vehicle for us to get to know each other a little bit better.
When I look out into the audience, I see a lot of, I see a film director, Anmin. I see content creators, Dana, professors, Lan Yung. I see people in the creative business. I see people who are here perhaps thinking about creativity or creation. And I want to ask you all, how do you sustain it, right? Because when you put out a book, it takes a long time, and sometimes it comes right out like a vomit during COVID, or sometimes it takes a lot longer. What keeps you going? Can you share with our audience what inspires you to keep going? Well, we'll start with Phil.
Yeah, I can start. I'm like, it's like very artistic. I'm like, I don't know if I'm an author or an artist or an organizer, an activist, whatever, any of those fancy words, but the volunteers, like the people, both with the stories. These are my mom's hands, by the way. I'm like that, open those. But we had a day where we brought all the folks that do art or do creative work that we know, like videographers, photographers. The book is designed in a way that like it required us volunteers, interns, to be on Canva and to like put everything together with the content that they got. And if y'all know, if you've ever asked like your parents to send you a picture of something, it always comes out hella blurry. But it looks a little bit like this. And the formatting, like maybe it's a little bit hard to read. You know, we could have done better. We'll do better on that for the next edition. But it's for us to be able to capture like these pieces of their history that they don't feel like is too important. These old family pictures, these old documents, and then weave that into the stories, right? I think this work wouldn't be done without the work of creatives and artists. And I think that in a time where we're, like from a nonprofit perspective, and just as an organizer perspective, we need to fund the arts, you know what I'm saying? Like, if we're taking money away from like quote unquote DEI, like a part of us being able to put together this book was to be able to advocate and say that like arts and culture and the letters are things that are important to us and are things and are ways that we engage with the mainstream and really assert that we exist, you know? So I think between the work of the volunteers and some of the grant funding that we got through working with the arts really motivated the production of this book and then the community response.
I just want to follow up real quick, this idea of funding. I think our community needs to believe that we can put out good art, that we are amazing creators, that our stories matter. As Viet Nguyen says, we are not a monolith. Like, we should be able to tell bad stories, good stories, pardon my French, shitty stories, and get away with all of it. Because all of our stories are important. The representation is important. So if we believe that our art and our creation's good, then the next generation or the previous generation can start funding. So if you all have money and you all start thinking about consuming our products, that's where it really starts. You?
For me, it took almost 10 years to get this book together. I had to talk to my uncle, who, when we lost our country, was locked up like a lot of our families and friends that we know in a re-education camp. So it's very difficult for him to talk about it, like you were saying. And they don't want to talk about it, really. But I was able to talk to him about that. So it took time for me, and then, you know, life happens, right? We're busy with work, so I just put it in the back burner. But I knew I had to finish it just to tell the story, not just one story, of a lot of amazing story in this country, of our refugees and what we have accomplished and done to come over here. And so for me, it's just finishing the book about just my journey, about the struggle, and I can relate with a lot of people I talk to. Just like on that Midway, 3,073 refugees were rescued in 2 days. That many. In every 5 years, we go back on that ship and we thank the men who saved us. I just went back last year for the 50, and it was over 3,000 Vietnamese American there, and the captain was still alive, 96 years old. He looks amazing. I told him, "You're coming back at 101, right?" And he said, "Yes," but just the history of life and what we've gone through, and to share that, I just wanted my kids and my grandkids. I have 2 grandkids. Matter of fact, they're there, right there. They just showed up, right there. And so I want them to know the history, not just what I went through, but we all went through.
we mentioned funding. I'll mention one thing and then get back to creativity. I decided to publish this book open access, and for me, I wasn't really sure what that meant, but it means me as an author, I don't get any of the 2 cents I get from a book sale. But what it means, what's kind of cool to think about it, is if you do buy a copy of the book, it actually supports making it free for others. And I thought the symbolism of that, the book is at Libromobile, but also I do have these handouts that have the QR code so that you can get access to the digital book. But that was really important to me in thinking about not only as an author, but what I create. I really wanted to push against this notion of like a solo authored product, right? So from, now I just told about the reception, basically even the consumption, whoever buys it supports the entire kind of publishing and makes it available for others globally. So there's a relationship to that. And for me as an author, this book, and in academic spheres, it's very you kind of put the scholar on a pedestal, and I just really every word I can see oh, that's from a conversation I had with my student, and then they asked me about the American Library Bill of Rights and questions about hatred. I don't know, very specific things, or it's oh, that's when I chose to translate the word as Vietnamese language nationalism and really thinking about questions of language rather than using a specific word, or that's when I chose to feature Ho Chen, who's a Southern writer who many people might not know about. But I want to make sure that people know about that. So those little micro decisions are a social and relational one, and it's a collective reflection too. So that was just one point that kind of inspired by thoughts about funding. And the second point about creativity, I went to this exhibit recently that was featuring a Tongva artist, an indigenous artist, and they said something really beautiful. They said that, sometimes we think about stories being silenced or forgotten, and I'm we gotta resuscitate those stories, we gotta go in there and uncover them and showcase to the world. But then actually they're no, actually those stories are just sleeping, and we awaken them. And I thought wow, what a peaceful, first of all, kind, gentle way of thinking about stories and storytelling. And that process for me was so much a reflection too, even in the writing of this academic scholarly book. There were parts of the stories that were already written mentally, emotionally, and they just need to be reawoken. Even as I am talking about this book and just also just going full circle, this is the coolest space for me to talk about my book, going just really full circle. I grew up in this community, I wish I had this when I was young. It's just boom, I'm oh my gosh, this completing this circle and this journey that will continue on to my 5-year-old who kind of got bored and left, but it's okay. But it's just really, oh no, they're still there. Oh, thank you, God. But it's just really thinking about these stories that get kind of reawoken inside of you through these social, emotional relationships, and they just continue on outside of you, outside of this moment, right? Kind of sparking that story, oh, go talk to your parents after this, or to your friend about this cool thing you learned. It's just, it leads beyond this moment, which I thought was really special.
Creativity is hard, y'all. It's emotional and mental and social labor. It's time consuming. And it really doesn't make sense in the grammar of how a lot of us grew up. Because I remember, he's got his shoes off, he's true to the culture. But I remember growing up, and I grew up in a housing project in LA, so there was a lot of gang violence. It's not really safe to go outside and play, so a lot of times I was inside, and my dad would send me books on the weekend, and thank God, because it kept me out of trouble. But whenever I was reading a book in my room, instead of mopping the floor or again, my mom would come in and say, Louis Bill, wow, it just doesn't make sense. What are you doing? And then I make a career off of reading and writing books, and she's trời ơi, cái con này ngu, just disgusted, because it just doesn't make sense. So I think a lot of that compounds some of this pressure to be creative. But something that Phillip said about his collection of all these stories really moved me, because I feel in the first 40 years of my life, I saw my role as the eldest daughter in a Vietnamese family, also always in a room full of Nguyens in my house. I was the only one. So my role was really to be, some of the audience really like that. There's one that doesn't. But my role was really to be kind of a vessel for my mother's stories. Like, she was dealing with a lot of trauma of, like Hugh said, fleeing the war, of coming to this country and experiencing discrimination. So my mom would recite these stories over and over again. And in the book, when she starts talking, it's always like with an ellipses, because they always begin the same way. Con nghe lời nào. Ở Việt Nam á. And then she gets real cải and like she acts out the whole thing, and she'll do it for hours. And so I listened, and I held my mother's pain, and I comforted her, and I showed her ways, like Cindy was saying, to translate things, to navigate this world that was very unforgiving for her. So that was my role. And then, after 40, I'm like, oh wait, I'm gonna be someone's elder and ancestor one day too. And doesn't my story matter in our family's history? Because my mom suffered the journey across the Pacific to have me here, to give me the privileges to think about, what does food mean? Like, what's the story behind it, Like all those things that we get to think about and talk about. So in this book, I really tried to focus on what was my story. It wasn't about Vietnam. It wasn't about the past or the war. It was the things that happened here to me as the first American-born child in my family. And so it's I felt like it was my responsibility to keep the story going, to not let colonialism, to let dominant narratives end our people's history at a war that they created for us that made us come here to begin with. So I think creativity is exhausting, but I find a renewed sense of energy and responsibility when I see the regurgitations of history happen again to other peoples in other lands. That, everywhere from Palestine to the ICE raids down the street here in Santana, our people are suffering. Like, we have brothers and sisters across cultural and linguistic lines. So when I have people who come from those backgrounds and tell me, I totally related to your relationship with your mom, or I totally get being depressed because of what's happening in the world, or I totally get this and that, things that I don't even expect that people would find in the pages that I wrote, that's really what fuels me, that it's not just about our community and our story, but it's a way for us to stay connected in all of the Wild West stuff that's going on now. So if we stick together and maintain that solidarity, that allows us the privilege, the space, the love, really. I feel love on this stage, y'all, to keep writing, to keep creating, to keep producing, because new life is hope.
If you all think that Jade has a third career in stand-up comedy, please you are a funny person. In Vietnamese, that would be great. Whenever I get together in the Vietnamese community around Vala, whether it's the Viet Film Fest or the Viet Book Fest, I have this renewed hope that, unlike the Japanese community, by the 4th generation, 5th generation, it's obliterated. Like, there's no interest in the culture. So when I look at the gatherings of the Vietnamese, it brings me so much hope to think about all of the artists and the creatives in our community. And we should celebrate this, and we should keep going over and over and over again. I'd love to hear each person's next endeavor. Let's skip around. Hugh, you go first.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
You speak Vietnamese better than I do. You should go first.
No.
So, let me hop on.
Okay. So I have a collection of poetry being released by Alternating Currents Press. It's a small indie press. later this year, I think in the fall. It's called To Those Who Don't Remember, and each poem is dedicated to every person who didn't remember me after they met me. Hugh, I don't know if you've had this, but I find something about being mixed. People are always like, didn't you, like, weren't you, oh, I saw this girl who looked like you, and I'm like, bruh, what? Like, what am I supposed to say? You saw someone who kind of looked like me, and then they showed me a picture, and it's just like, who, what, how are you? I don't understand. So, that's dedicated to all those jerks. And then, currently, I am trying to do the midnight writing, or like the lunch break writing, of a book that's about living with hepatitis B, which is so endemic in Vietnam, and so many of us have carried here. And so in living with that chronic illness since birth, I feel like it's important to talk about what that means on a daily basis, and the fact I'm the last person in my family to have it, because then all the kids who came after me got the immunization. So it's kind of like its own little legacy, and it speaks back to history in Vietnam, things that happened there. It speaks to the medical system, which is not too great here. And there's just a lot of stories kind of woven through living with that illness that I want to be able to share. And I think it was NBC Asian America that came out with an article recently saying that the majority of people living with hepatitis B are Asian Americans. And so that's something that people don't really talk about. So if you can't tell, I like to talk about things that nobody else wants to talk about, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to try.
So I told my family that I was gonna take a break, you know, and there was like a moment with the writing, I was like, maybe I can never like touch a book again or even like look at a book because I was so horrified by the writing process. So that being said, I think like, to be perfectly honest, I wanna spend this year celebrating, and trying to resist, right? Like moving on to like, I gotta do the next thing. And in a way, maybe it's like in the resting and in the joy, like, oh my God, yeah, we're gonna get that. Okay, yeah, we can preview it. So Sen's been Kenneth's been to several of my book talks, and he actually is like my assistant often. So he actually has something that I made with a social enterprise that's in Hanoi that works on paper preservation called Zaw Project. And we collaborate together to make these little leaflets. I don't know if I have enough, but maybe Tianan, if you speak talking, he'll give one to you. But at least I want to share a line from this because I think it really gets to kind of the slowing down that I like to do in my like creative process now. So this is from the book, and actually the citation is, it was from an anonymous reader who was reflecting on what it means to read in 1924. So this was written in Vietnamese. So the translation then goes, imagine this. On a beautiful moonlit day with a pleasant breeze, a few close friends gather together, discussing a few lines from literature, and together they relish in more and more joyfulness. Or alone in the evening hours, under the light, a book becomes our friend, and any sadness we carry dissipates. So this is 100 years ago, right? Someone reflecting upon the joy it comes from just sitting with a book and like the book becoming our friend, right? And so like I've been sitting with my own book too, and just like relishing the joy that process. The joy, there was sorrow, pain, and sweat, but like also those moments of joy. So that's like the kind of like honest thing. But I will mention that I am like returning to many projects that sat to the wayside while I was working on this. So I'm also a filmmaker and poet too, in the many hats that I wear. And a lot of the film and poetry that I used to write was all about like language and loss and misunderstanding, and also a reflection of like my relationship with my family. There's like a new stage in my life now, which is really about like yang and like joy. So I have like bits and pieces of this film and assemblage work that I've been doing, as well as like, yeah, you can give it to them, come on, you can do it. But like I have this work that we, like my partner and family, my mom like made together. So I want to spend more time with that creative work. I don't know the form it's gonna be, but I'm just really excited to return to something else that sat by the wayside. while I was doing this one.
Yeah, you know what? I agree, Cindy. We all work so hard every day. And as I get older, I won't say we, but as I get older, you know, I'm enjoying coaching my grandson baseball team in Irvine. We need to enjoy life a little more, especially when I see good friends that are passing away. And, you know, I love my job, right? And I'm on my 4th term. I'm running for my 4th term. And I think this might be it. I don't know yet, but depends on my health and what God has in plan for me. But I agree. I mean, we all want to share a story and work hard, but I want to try to enjoy life more. We work so hard every day and enjoy our kids and grandkids. So for me, just working hopefully for another 4 years as elected, and then I'll see where my life is at that stage. But I agree with you guys, just enjoying life. And just, Jade, yeah, I go to a Vietnamese restaurant and I order food in Vietnamese and people do trip out. So, yeah, it's different for us, but, you know, we're all as one family, so that's what I'm gonna do.
I will probably, after Viet Book Fest, go look for a nice plate of cơm tấm. Probably cơm tấm, Sài Gòn or Sa Pi Chữ are pretty. Cơm tấm Thanh is like the OG, you know. Yeah, I think for personally, I'll be at Coachella weekend too. But for this project, just had to throw that in there, you know, some levity. For this project, just talking, you know, we'll be back. I'll be heading back to San Jose, to the Bay Area. This project wouldn't be what it is without the folks back there at home. We're looking to do a second edition of this, the Đình Anthology Cookbook. We're hoping to highlight more like small business folks in our community, some of like the folks that like maybe you've heard of, that like Pho Hanoi I think is opening something down here, right? But those folks, I don't know if they'll share a recipe with us, but hopefully at least we can get like their story and really like show how these folks, these mom and pop shops, these folks like our family and our community members have sort of built the things that the fruits of their labor are what we get to enjoy now, right? And it kind of started with the seeds of this book. And so we'll be looking forward to that. On the 30th, if y'all have any friends and family in San Jose or in the Bay Area, we'll be doing a commemoration. Please invite them out. Invite them out to become a part of our summer youth program. There are so many opportunities. I feel like when we're in like the little Saigons, I know this is the OG one, but we got one in San Jose that's like burgeoning. Right, I see you, Ken. We're trying to make it our own. You know, we're trying to really claim the space and really placemake in terms of like why don't we have a like. You know, how do we expand Viet Book Fest or Viet Film Fest or just the identity or the idea of what it means to be Vietnamese across the diaspora? And I think that's really dope. So if y'all are available on the 30th, we'll be at San Jose City Hall to commemorate, but also to celebrate 51 years and counting of our fight and search for freedom and future. Yeah, so that's what we'll be up to. Check.
Thank you, Phil. So Phil just called out my shirt. Little Saigon Official. I wear a lot of their merch. I do a lot of my podcasts at the Little Saigon Official store in the Asian Garden Mall. The merchandise is amazing. It's heavy duty quality hoodies, hats. Some of you might not agree with some of the slogans. It's it's edgy. You said it, Tiger, not me. But it's a testament to the strength of our identity. Our newfound acceptance to come to this pride, right? The love of our community, and I wear it very proudly, so thank you for calling this out. I can end this two ways today, and I'm gonna try to find a way to blend this. I can give everybody up here a closing remark, which I have about 8 to 9 minutes left, or I can give a quick round of Q&A. So so we'll go for a quick round of Q&A. They are going to be available outside for if you would like to talk to them. So it's up to all of you. I'm going to try to go for the Q&A real quick because I think it's special when we get to hear from them. And then your closing remarks, you guys can talk to the audience after. Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'll repeat it.
Okay.
Yes, stand up and project. Go for it.
Okay, so I'm 16. I'm getting near to the end of editing the second draft of my book. And I need to start the third draft right after. How do I know after how many drafts is it ready to be sent out?
That's a great question. So she writes and she's on her third draft. How does she know when it's ready to go out? Taylor, you raised a great daughter, by the way. Awesome.
First of all, my dear, congratulations on drafting a book at 16 years old.
Right on.
Dang. Wow, it's very impressive, so congrats. I'm still rewriting my book in my head. There's so many things I left out. I came up with a much better ending, so if you read it, there's a better one in here. So I don't think in that way that the writing is ever done. I would say once you give yourself time away from it, and you come back and can find something that you feel proud of, it's ready to show other people. There's always going to be things that you want to fix, but if there's a level of pride, you know that you're ready for other eyes to see it and connect with it. So go from there, and then once editors start looking at it and giving you feedback, your son is so cute. He's so business official right now. Once readers start to connect with it, then you'll know.
Yeah, you can continue to keep writing. It's never going to end. I agree with you, Jade. Just go with your heart, and when you feel it's the right product, just go for it. I mean, take a chance. Just do it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
It was more a question for Phillip. When you were writing Ganya Đình, did you have to reconcile differences between the Vietnamese palette and the American palette? And do you feel like that was something that you found difficult, or was it something that you embraced?
Did everybody hear that question? Okay, so that's a great question, by the way. There's this reconciliation between the American palette and the Vietnamese palette, and how much of considering the two palettes did you have to deal with and contend with?
Yeah, so as we got the story, so we collected the stories, and me and a team of our staff edited the text. I don't know if this is a cop-out answer. I feel like it's very uniquely Vietnamese American. It's very situated in the United States. It's very an homage to refugee, boat people, HO, ODP, all those folks that came after 1975. It's also a bunch of family recipes. So like for my family, like I grew up in Lancaster, Palmdale, so we drove like an hour and a half to come down here. Beyond that, like all we had was like a Vallarta and like whatever, like Ralph's or Albertsons, right? And they don't necessarily have like the right seasonings. And I think that was reflected in the food that we ate. We tried to do our best to capture the essence of that. Like both folks who were able to have access to like different Vietnamese grocery stores or supermarkets or Chinese or whatever it is, right? Whatever they had available to them, and imbue that in the, if it wasn't already, like imbue that in the stories that we collected and shared back out. Yeah, and I think like it being this sort of hodgepodge mix and match of like being both Vietnamese and American and Vietnamese American, and then also like not understanding or trying to figure out what that all means to us, I think is what we wanted to share back in each of the stories. So me as an individual, like I can't answer that, but for the stories, I think it really, we did our best to try to showcase the nuance of who we are as a community.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Ngọc, and my first time participating in this wonderful Viet book, and I shall come back next year.
Wonderful.
You guys all did a fantastic job, very eloquent and very convincing, and I think I'm going to buy all of your books after this. So that's the first point. The second point is that I really like the resonate with Jade and Hugh's points about connecting to the shared stories, the shared sufferings of all the marginalized. Consider kind of a comparative panel, bringing in other people from different ethnicities and races to talk about the same thing that you mentioned earlier about anti-dominant narratives and the kind of racism that's happening and the stories of immigrants
Yeah, let me answer that by saying that I'm gonna talk to my boss, Ji Tao Ha, and he will pass that down to the board. I think it's a lovely idea, but let me talk to my boss about this. Yes.
I really appreciate that question, the importance of building community for us, but also not treating us in a silo, right? Like it's so important, and I think you were gesturing towards this in terms of solidarity across like immigrant communities, but really to like have this conversation to talk about like language and laws and connection and narrative and mental health, like really across, and you know, and also like immigration and rights and like what it means to be thank you, like an activist. Like all these conversations need to not happen in a silo. And I see this a lot, even in my own work, is I'm often the person that like teaches Vietnamese history to non-Vietnamese too, and then the connections that you see from all across different walks of life, and then like kind of translating also like a historical context of like racist colonial hegemony and like language politics and like loss of rights in this context, and being like, well, this contemporary moment, like we gotta think about this, like how do people organize, how did we like self-empower, how do we build kind of coalition across, so like really making that type of bridge making is so key.
Before I beg Philip to go to Kam Tam. Yes. Kam Tam later.
I had to insert myself because Ken brought me into the wonderful question. And I just want to say that, you know, in order to do that, you know, it's about capacity. There is no limitation to imagination and creativity and the need to connect. And what you're asking is critical. However, we are doing one day right now of Viet Book Fest, and you can see, or hopefully see in the background, how much work our volunteers are doing, how much money we have to raise to produce something like a Viet Book Fest for just one day. So to add to the narrative sharing, we need to add more days. I think we need 2-day Viet Book Fest, because Viet Film Fest is 3 days, and we have included, you know, other narratives and stories and experiences. So, you know, when our community asks us, because there's a want and a desire and a need, we have to think about money. and where do we get that? Does it come from the grants? Does it come from donors? And asking community to consider that production is not just about the labor and on the backs of our volunteers, but really having the community support the organization itself as a mechanism of a machine that does require that kind of sourcing to make it happen. So please donate.
I'm available if anybody needs to talk to me after. I'd love to talk and answer questions, and we can all catch the guests up here outside. First of all, I want to thank everybody here for attending this, because without you, we can't sell books, we can't sell ads in the podcast, we can't do many of these things. So please consider what Jitao said about funding, about donating, and thank you all, the 4 of you, for opening up and sharing such valuable ideas, and for creating the product and the things that make us proud and love for our culture. Thank you all.